Gaming phones continue to pop up, and some of the latest crop have been bringing high levels of power without breaking the bank. Here we have one from Red Magic, a smartphone with gamer stylings that is quite the cool operator. Quite literally. This is Pocket Now, and I'm Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? Let's get some gaming done with this, the Red Magic 6. I'm actually going to do something a little bit different this time around. Normally, I start from the outside looking in, ending with the camera because that tends to be one of the most important parts of a smartphone. The thing is, this Red Magic 6 has a specific focus, and it's not on being a creative tool. So I'm going to flip the script a little and talk about the camera first. The Red Magic 6 comes with a triple camera setup, but it's a combination that you might expect from a phone that doesn't prioritize imaging. That's because the main sensor is the good 64 megapixel shooter with two backups. You get a wide-angle camera that marks a significant dip down to 8 megapixels, while the 2 megapixel depth sensor is there for supporting portrait shots. Or you want a victory selfie with the front-facing camera that is also at 8 megapixels and tops out at 1080p video recording. It's a camera package that we've actually seen on the previous Red Magic model. However, to the company's credit, not too many other phones around this price point have the same performance specs and extras. I was actually really impressed at how many modes and settings there were to play with in the camera app, but if camera quality overall is what you're looking for, the Red Magic 6 is just somewhere between passable and kind of decent. There's plenty more that makes up the entire smartphone experience, and that brings us to the general smartphone, before we flip this gaming switch and turn things up to 11. Red Magic's Android OS, called Red Magic OS, like the camera, is a part of the smartphone that actually isn't fully polished, nor is it really the highlight of the experience if we're being honest here. Functionally, it's a good enough everyday smartphone interface, but there are some kinks in the localization, and there are design aspect choices that make it clear that Red Magic is still rather young in the Android interface game. Okay, certain features are expected, like gesture controls, split-screen multitasking, floating windows, and robust options for the always-on display. And speaking of customizations, these LED-enabled areas on the back can give some visual flair on top of the already aggressive stylings. By the way, kind of a fun fact here, as you can see on the back, Red Magic sent us a phone with a global ROM, but installed that software on a Tencent Games Edition unit. These units, physically, are only available in China. LED strips above and below those brand logos pulse under certain conditions, including during gaming, while charging, and when notifications come in. And then there's the Red Magic logo on the bottom, which only lights up in the signature red color and can be steady on or breathe in and out. If you're already all about that RGB everything life, then these extra bits of flash and flare might just be for you. But I do applaud Red Magic for trying to make sure that these bits have some extra utility. Going around the phone, we have a couple of the expected additions. The power button is opposite the volume rocker, but flanking the power button on its side are the touch-sensitive air triggers. I did just applaud Red Magic for putting extra thought into the LED additions on the back, but these shoulder triggers are just used for gaming. I can mostly understand that because they are touch-sensitive, and thus accidental presses in the normal software interface would probably be pretty common. The USB-C charging port down south supports 66-watt charging of the 5050 mAh battery. Now, these are specs that bode well for those long gaming or media consumption sessions. And speaking of ports, gaming phones actually tend to not skimp out on some of the practical effects, like having an actual headphone jack, so you can easily charge the phone while having zero latency wired audio playback. So we're slowly making our way to the high specs, which now brings us to the display. This 6.8-inch AMOLED display is already quite the looker. One that I already mentioned sports an always-on display. There is also an in-display fingerprint reader that is available for biometric security, although face unlock is also an option. The screen's viewing experience is as good as expected, as the resolution is the general standard of Full HD+. But true to the trends in gaming phones and displays, this screen pumps out an awesome 165Hz refresh rate. There's an obvious game of one-upsmanship here, but kudos goes to Red Magic overtaking the previous top smartphone display refresh rate of 144Hz. And much like in the world of gaming monitors, the refresh rate is a specialty feature. That's because much of the media you might view from video streaming services doesn't even top 60 frames per second, and very few games actually get anywhere near that number of 165. App and game developers also have to specifically support the super high refresh rate, which remains a mixed bag at even more conventional levels of around 90 frames per second. It's just all stuff you have to keep in mind if you're specifically looking at the refresh rate as a deal maker, because there's plenty more to enjoy and it all jumps out at you once you flip the switch in the corner. That's right, the phone completely changes from a smartphone that simply ticks all the usual boxes to a mobile gaming powerhouse that adds plenty of unique features and experiences. By hitting that switch, most of the general everyday features are shut off, like banner notifications, and you can hit the performance modes to really pump the Snapdragon 888 into gear, even into overdrive. You also gain access to features like the shoulder triggers for mapping and then the turbofan. If you want to have access to a few applications, there are shortcuts to them, and they render as a floating window overlay on top of your gaming interface. But for all intents and purposes, you're given a carousel or selection screen that mimics game console home screens. You even saw that there's a boot up animation when triggering the switch. This is also where you would set up any of the different Red Magic accessories, but I don't have any to show off in this review. One that I would have really been interested to try out is the side controller, kind of like Switch style. It's called the esports handle in this interface. There are also the two different coolers, but those are only if I want to get super extra with my performance gains. After all, the Red Magic 6 continues the company's tradition of having built-in fans and ventilation. The hum is noticeable, but obviously not a problem when you're playing with headphones on. And you can turn it off in the slide-out menu during games that are less intensive, like Slay the Spire, and then turn it back on in more demanding games like Genshin Impact. So what's it like gaming on this phone? For the most part, it's like any other Snapdragon 888 powered device. Certain games will simply benefit from the added cooling so that there are no dips in performance or frame rate. Games that are all about the touchscreen like Slay the Spire and Shin Megami Tensei DX2 will operate the same way as always because there aren't really any practical use cases for the shoulder triggers in those games. For the most part, those extra buttons will be best for shooter games like Call of Duty Mobile or PUBG Mobile, which should be pretty obvious given the Tencent sponsorship. The shoulder triggers could be an edge that is given to competitive gamers in those particular titles, but for everyone else it's simply giving a more comfortable gaming experience, and that might be enough for some of you. It's certainly gotten me returning to Call of Duty Mobile since the last time I played it, which was more than likely on a phone like this that had those extra inputs. I did try to apply the triggers to Genshin Impact with mostly positive results, but I was just happy that I could play consistently well at max settings in that game, which is a feat that most other companies' flagship devices actually sometimes struggle with. And then of course there's League of Legends Wild Rift, which is another example of a game that doesn't quite benefit from those extra inputs. It is a game where the fast input is needed, so the 500Hz touch sampling rate is definitely welcome. But the caveat from earlier comes back again. Wild Rift is yet another game that has to be specifically tuned for the high refresh rate screen. It tops out at 90 frames per second. More here than on most phones, it's easy to get so into the gaming that hours and hours go by without me realizing it. That is partially true for the battery life, and also because I tended to have the phone plugged in while playing. But the main thing that I noticed is that the phone would never get close to uncomfortably warm, like compared to other Snapdragon 888 enabled devices. While I'm nowhere near the level of an esports player, those things I just mentioned are still tangible and significant benefits to a product like this that might be considered niche. After all, this is a question I have seen many ponder. What is the point of gaming phones? Well, since we're now on iteration 6, technically, in the Red Magic line, I think it's clear that the category isn't going anywhere but forward, and I'm all for it. There have always been games in the Play Store that I feel warrant all of our attention, and I often said that about classic titles that get adapted to mobile platforms. Games like KOTOR or GTA San Andreas. Of course, there are emulators for classic consoles and game streaming for current console and PC titles. But games like Call of Duty Mobile, Genshin Impact, Wild Rift, and the more recent My Hero Academia make it clear that custom graphics settings and scalable experiences can be part of our smartphone worlds. And as the market for these awesome games continues to grow, so too will this category of smartphone. Case in point, there are gaming phones out there that prioritize the premium features and have high price points to match them. But then you get the Red Magics of the world that prioritize the performance, but then dial back the rest just enough to make the mobile gaming experience more accessible. I actually think Red Magic is to gaming smartphones what MSI is kind of to gaming computers. Overall, the gamer can get the kind of experience they were seeking. Just know that when you put the games away, there might be a few hiccups, some random design cues, and even misspellings along the path to good general everyday use. And that red switch will always be there when you're itching to get back into the fray. For more on gaming phones like the Red Magic and beyond, subscribe to Pocket Now for videos that come out basically every day. Drop some likes on this video and let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. With all of that said, we're going to call it on this one. Thank you so much for watching. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and we will see you in our next video.